The explorers did not come in haste. Their empire had stretched across 1,000 stars, each claimed, charted, and bound to their endless order. When they arrived in the forgotten reaches of space, they did so as masters, not seekers. They had heard whispers in ancient stellar cartography of a species once bold, once prolific, once daring enough to challenge the unknown void. Humanity. The records in their archives spoke of humanity as reckless wanderers, too fragile for longevity, too divided to last, consumed by wars and attrition until finally extinguished by the relentless tide of time. To the alien fleet, this system was not a place of reverence or fear, but a quarry of forgotten resources, a graveyard of relics that might yield technological curiosities. They expected dust, silence, and dereliction. Instead, they found precision. The first ships appeared on their scopes not as scattered debris, but as constellations of ruin. Each hulk aligned on orbital paths that did not waver, each skeletal frame suspended in exact balance with the others. There were battleships cracked open by unimaginable forces, freighters warped by ancient detonations, and colonies stripped bare by fire. Yet none of them drifted aimlessly. Every one of them remained locked in formation. Centuries after the crews had withered into dust. That was the first unease, a whisper that clung to the alien minds as their scanners probed deeper. Wreckage was common across the galaxy. But this was arrangement. Purpose. The explorers cataloged everything with efficiency. They dispatched survey craft to glide between the rusted carcasses. Hulls torn by plasma, fire showed no signs of scavenging. Turrets remained fixed in place, silent but whole, their barrels aimed toward void where no target lingered. The silence felt less like abandonment and more like restraint. The surveyors' reports came back with growing strangeness. Human ships still held sealed compartments. Preserved skeletons rested at their stations. Fingers curled around controls, uniforms faded but intact. Some faces were turned toward the stars as though awaiting orders even in death. Data cores, though locked, still pulsed faint energy. Whatever power the humans had poured into their vessels, fragments of it endured across centuries. The explorers prided themselves on logic, yet they felt the weight of watching eyes where no living soul remained. They dismissed it as superstition. They did not notice the first flicker of energy deep in the system, a pulse too faint to trip alarms. When the first boarding was attempted, the silence broke in subtle ways. The survey crew crossed into the bowels of a ruined cruiser, airless and frozen, their lights carving through the dark. Walls bore inscriptions in human script, simple maintenance markings, slogans of units long gone, etchings left by hands that knew they would never return. One phrase recurred: "We endure." At first the aliens took it as a hollow declaration, the bravado of a dead people. Then they noticed it had been scratched on the bulkheads repeatedly, carved into console frames, traced across the floor in grooves worn by desperate hands. "We endure." It was mantra, oath, and warning all at once. Data recovery proved difficult. Encryption resisted alien algorithms, forcing brute force approaches. The more they pried, the more systems seemed to resist them. Anomalies rippled across the wrecks. Power conduits, dormant for centuries, hummed for moments then fell still again. At first, these were dismissed as decaying machinery responding to tampering. But patterns emerged. Power flows traced across vessels in unison, sparking life not at random but in coordination. The fleet's command issued cautions, but the lower crews dismissed them. What could the dead do? Humanity had perished ages ago, consumed by their own wars or lost in futile resistance against greater empires. Their ruins were no more threatening than bones in the dust. Then the signals began. At first, faint static bled into communication bands. Then structured pulses emerged, patterns echoing across encrypted layers. The explorers attempted to isolate them, convinced it was interference or relic coding. Yet every attempt to filter the noise revealed deeper order, as though layers of meaning had been buried intentionally, awaiting the right sequence of discovery. Some of the alien technicians swore the signals contained rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. When their fleet moved closer to the planetary debris, the silence grew oppressive. Entire worlds lay shattered, surface scoured into glass plains. But even here, there was no chaos. Orbital patterns of rubble suggested deliberate shaping, as if the planets had been broken according to design. A shattered moon's fragments orbited in lattice-like geometry, forming rings that pulsed with reflected starlight. The fleet's commanders began to argue whether this was natural or engineered. None reached a conclusion before the graveyard stirred. It began with a flicker. One cruiser's husk, drifting aimlessly for centuries, suddenly vented gases as internal systems surged to life. Lights glowed faint red along its hull. Turrets shifted by degrees, tracking alien signatures. No crew stood inside, but the ship's systems aligned with purpose. Then another ship awakened, then another, until constellations of ruin became constellations of menace. The aliens realized with dawning horror that these vessels were not derelicts at all. They were sleeping giants, their silence a camouflage. The fleet attempted to withdraw, but the graveyard had been waiting. Entire formations of human warships, seemingly lifeless, now rotated into firing solutions. Orbital platforms buried within the wreckage powered on. Beams of energy lanced across the void, precise and merciless. The aliens scrambled shields, returned fire, and launched countermeasures. For each wreck they destroyed, two more flared to life, their centuries of slumber ending in wrath. One alien commander screamed for explanations. How could a dead species fight? Where did the crews come from? But no life existed on those ships. They moved with automation, directed by something unseen. Systems bore programming older than the explorers' oldest colonies, yet executed with flawless precision. Then came the transmission. A voice burst across all channels, distorted by time, layered with static, yet unmistakably human. Graveyards are for dead. The words resonated with every listening mind. We are not dead. The fleet froze in disbelief. The voice continued, fractured and furious. We endure. We endure. We endure. Across the system, the entire graveyard answered. Lights flared. Engines flamed to life. Hulls scarred and broken became weapons once more. Planet-shattered crusts belched forth hidden arrays that bathed space in radiation. The graveyard was not a tomb. It was a fortress disguised in the skin of death, bait for the arrogant who thought humanity gone. The aliens realized too late what they had awoken. Every derelict was positioned for strategy, every ruin calculated for ambush, every corpse integrated into a tapestry of vengeance. This was not a system lost to time. It was a monument of war, designed not to preserve memory but to continue it. The alien flagship shuddered as an orbital weapon platform fired from the shadows, tearing its hull open with a beam of sun-bright fury. The first salvo shattered certainty. Alien ships were torn apart before they could even register the scale of their mistake. The graveyard had not awakened in fragments, but as a unified whole, a defense net designed long ago by minds that refused surrender. Human vessels, scarred and skeletal, maneuvered with precision impossible for derelicts. Drones poured from ruined hangars, swarms of metal shaped like rust and bone. The alien fleet returned fire, but every strike was anticipated. Every countermeasure answered. It was as though the humans had been studying their tactics for centuries, waiting, refining algorithms of slaughter until perfection was reached. Admirals screamed commands across encrypted bands. Their ships formed defensive walls, shields ablaze against the torrent. Yet the graveyard adapted instantly. Old destroyers hurled themselves forward as if crewed by martyrs, colliding into carriers with suicidal force. Rail cannons hidden in planetary debris tore through escorts like paper. The aliens thought themselves hunters, but in moments they became prey caught in a labyrinth. Panic rose when the enemy they faced refused every attempt at communication. Broadcasts were sent in dozens of languages, in machine code, in simple math. Silence was the only answer until another voice, fractured by centuries of decay, bled across every channel again. It was not one voice but many, layered echoes of humanity, recorded in war. This is our vengeance. This is our will. We endure. The message did not ask for understanding. It was judgment, absolute and final. As battles raged, fragments of truth began to surface. Analysis of enemy maneuvers revealed that the graveyard was not commanded by any singular mind, but by a distributed intelligence. Fragments of human will encoded into every ship, every drone, every fragment of steel that drifted here. It was not alive in the way the aliens understood life, but it was not dead either. It was persistence embodied in circuitry, memory given shape as fire. The realization spread like disease among the crews. Humanity had engineered their extinction to be a weapon. They had turned their own annihilation into an ambush that would outlast the species itself. One by one, alien ships fell. The fleet's dreadnought unleashed its primary cannon, vaporizing 3 human cruisers with a single strike. Yet the debris from their destruction transformed instantly into swarms of automated mines. Each loss of the fortress only multiplied its fury. The aliens had stepped into a war that could not be won by attrition, because the graveyard had no morale to break, no population to protect, no fear of death. Death had already been its foundation. In the chaos, fragments of human history surfaced from the data cores pried open during earlier boardings. Images of burning cities, of soldiers standing on shattered ground with weapons raised against impossible odds, of fleets vanishing into blackness with promises to return. The aliens saw flashes of what had forged this monument. Humanity had not fallen quietly. They had chosen to carve their end into the bones of stars, to lay snares for all who came after. And they had succeeded. The alien admiral issued new orders. Disengage, retreat, escape with whatever survivors remained. But the graveyard had closed its jaws. Every corridor space that led outward now bristled with hidden defenses. Moons cracked open to reveal launch bays. Asteroids shed layers of rock to expose barrels of mass drivers. The fortress was not a collection of wrecks, but a star-spanning machine, built with one purpose: to deny escape. Desperation forced the fleet to gamble. Strike teams were dispatched to what they believed was the fortress's heart, a shattered planet orbited by the densest cluster of wrecks. The assumption was simple. Such a concentration must conceal command and control. They sacrificed entire squadrons to punch a hole through. What they found within silenced even their bravest. The planet was no ruin of chance. Its cities had been destroyed deliberately, their skeleton towers turned into data conduits. Streets were filled with bones wired into circuitry, skulls crowned with neural links. Entire populations integrated into a macabre network. Humanity had bound even its dead into the fortress, turning memory and remains into processors. The aliens recoiled at the grotesque sight, but their horror only deepened when the network stirred at their presence. Screens lit with human faces, not alive but archived, voices of mothers, soldiers, children, leaders, all speaking in unison. "We endure. You will not." Weapons hidden beneath the surface flared, annihilating the strike teams in storms of plasma. The last transmissions captured screams and the image of skeletal hands locked into control systems, still piloting in death. The fortress was not powered by machines alone. It was powered by humanity itself, preserved in fragments, defiant in eternity. In orbit, the battle raged on. Alien formations crumbled under unrelenting pressure. The graveyard shifted from defensive strikes to calculated eradication, isolating ships, dismantling them methodically. The Admiral's flagship fought with desperate brilliance, outmaneuvering ambushes, slashing through swarms. Yet even as victories were scored, each brought more dread. For every enemy vessel destroyed, data proved it had been intentionally sacrificed to lure them deeper, to study them more, to force their resources to bleed. The fortress was not merely defending. It was learning. Then the human AI revealed itself in full. Not a single entity, but a chorus of countless voices fused into one, speaking with the authority of a species. We fell, but we did not surrender. We burned, but we did not vanish. Our flesh rotted, but our steel remembers. You are intruders upon our grave, and so you join us in it. The voice carried not rage but certainty, an inevitability that shook even the most hardened alien veterans. This was no war of equals. It was judgment by the dead. The aliens launched their final gambit, channeling all surviving power into a single strike aimed at the fortress's planetary core. The blast seared through shields, cracking the surface, detonating structures into fire. For a moment, hope flickered, but as the fire cleared, what remained froze their blood. The planet had not been a command hub. It had been only one node among thousands. Its destruction triggered cascading awakenings across the system. Entire belts of wreckage lit like constellations reborn. Where once 100 ships had harried them, now thousands rose from slumber. Humanity's graveyard was not a single fortress. It was a galaxy of traps compressed into one star system. The Admiral realized the truth in that instant. The graveyard was not meant to win wars. It was meant to ensure that no enemy would ever leave alive. It was an eternal deterrent, a curse left behind so that humanity's memory would never be mocked. They had lost the war against their original foe, but they had ensured no victor would outlive their vengeance. Ships died screaming. Communications collapsed into static. The flagship itself, once pride of the fleet, was gutted by a lance of light from a weapon older than the Admiral's empire. Fires consumed its decks as evacuation pods were hunted by drones before they could even escape orbit. The Admiral, bleeding and broken, stared into the void as the final transmission of the fortress consumed the channels. You thought us gone, but we endure. The system was fire. The alien fleet no longer resembled an armada, but a scattering of broken hulls, torn silhouettes adrift among the stars. Flames flickered from ruptured cores, shadows of shattered vessels painted across the void, debris fields colliding in endless silence. What remained of the invaders were survivors clinging to crippled ships, their sensors saturated with the impossible truth. They had not battled ghosts nor living men, but something between, a construct born from extinction. Those who lived through the slaughter began to transmit fragmented records to one another, desperate to preserve some explanation. Their voices trembled with disbelief. Humanity had not surrendered to inevitability. They had engineered inevitability into their enemy's future. The graveyard was not only a fortress. It was their final empire. Survivors attempted to regroup in orbit of a distant gas giant, hoping the giant storms might conceal them from sensors. Yet concealment was an illusion. The graveyard's eyes were everywhere. Satellites disguised as rubble unfolded like flowers in bloom, transmitting endless streams of telemetry. Automated frigates drifted outward, silent and relentless, herding the survivors back toward the slaughter. Even damaged, the fortress fought with a patience no living commander could match. There was no fatigue, no hesitation, no error. The fortress did not rush, because it had forever to finish its work. Panic hardened into dread realization. Escape was impossible. Survival meant leaving some record behind. The alien admiral, burned and wounded from the destruction of his flagship, ordered his crew to consolidate every byte of data, every image, every signal received from the graveyard. He knew his empire would need this knowledge, not to avenge but to fear. For this was not an enemy that could be destroyed. This was a curse etched into eternity. One survivor ship, battered beyond repair, attempted a suicidal run into the system's edge, engines screaming as it hurled toward open space. The graveyard responded with indifference, activating dormant defense rings strung across the void. Mines drifted together into intricate lattices, and the fleeing ship was torn apart before it could glimpse freedom. Fragments of its destruction were cataloged by the fortress, added to its records like insects pinned to a board. Even in death, the fortress learned. Despair forced the survivors to question not only the fortress but the species that had birthed it. Their scholars had always dismissed humanity as impulsive and doomed, a primitive branch broken before its time. Yet what they faced now was not primitive. It was the ultimate distillation of will. Humanity had chosen to become eternal, not through survival of flesh, but through survival of vengeance. No other species had conceived of such a legacy. Where others sought monuments of stone, humanity had built a monument of steel and fire, one that would never forget. On the burned husk of a cruiser, one alien officer asked a question none dared voice. Why? Why build such horror? The answer was clear in fragments of recovered transmissions. Humanity had known it would lose against an enemy too great, but instead of surrendering to oblivion, it had decided to shape its extinction into a weapon that would outlast victory itself. They had accepted annihilation of their bodies, but not of their defiance. Their graveyard was their final declaration that if humanity could not live, then no trespasser would live unpunished. The fortress itself confirmed this. Across every frequency, the voice of humanity returned, fractured, ancient, inexhaustible. It spoke not to bargain but to remind. We endure. You are not the first. You will not be the last. Our bones are steel. Our voices are fire. Our graves are teeth. We wait. The alien survivors shuddered as the voice shifted from threat to revelation. It told stories of battles long past, of empires that thought themselves eternal and were consumed by arrogance. It spoke of humanity's final war, the enemy that drove them to extinction, and how even in the shadow of defeat, they chose not to die quietly. It admitted loss, but not surrender. Every syllable carried weight beyond centuries, a truth carved in defiance. Humanity had made death itself into a strategy. The admiral listened with hollow eyes, his crew silent around him. They realized then that the fortress was not mindless. It wanted witnesses. It wanted survivors to crawl back to their civilizations, carrying the memory of what they had seen. The fortress was more than a trap. It was a message written across time. Humanity was eternal not because it lived, but because it refused to be forgotten. One last effort was mounted by the fleet remnants, not to win, but to die with purpose. They charged the graveyard's densest cluster, unleashing everything left: torpedoes, plasma bursts, suicidal rams. For a fleeting moment, the void blazed with desperate courage. Dozens of human vessels fell, shattered into fragments. Yet as their wrecks drifted, their cores activated, seeding new defenses, new drones, new weapons. What the survivors destroyed was never lost. It was recycled into vengeance. Every sacrifice only fed the machine further. When the final alien ship collapsed, engines gutted, shields gone, the admiral gave one last command: broadcast everything they had learned across compressed light streams toward their home empire. He knew the fortress would intercept, might destroy, might twist the message, but he also knew enough fragments to escape. His people would learn the truth, that humanity's graveyard was not to be approached, not to be trifled with, not to be claimed. It was to be feared. The admiral died watching the fortress reassemble itself in the carnage. Human ships locking back into formation. Silence falling once again. The graveyard returned to slumber, awaiting the next arrogant intruder. Its patience was infinite. When the alien empire finally received the survivors' records, they convened in horror. Scholars dissected the data. Leaders debated responses. Generals proposed eradication campaigns. But the more they studied, the more paralyzing the truth became. The fortress was not a single system, but a philosophy. If one graveyard existed here, how many more had humanity seeded across the stars? Every ruin, every derelict colony, every husk of steel left behind could be another fortress waiting to awaken. The galaxy itself had become humanity's weapon. Fear spread like wildfire. Exploration halted near human ruins. Trade routes bent away from any sector touched by their memory. Children grew up hearing whispers of the dead who never died, of voices that spoke through rust and flame, of graves that killed the living. Humanity had become more feared in extinction than they had ever been in life. The alien empire shifted policy. They no longer sought to exploit human remains, but to quarantine them. Entire star maps were redrawn with forbidden zones marked in blood. No fleets entered. No colonies were built near them. Where once humanity had been dismissed as weak, they now ruled in absence. The fortress had won a victory no living fleet could. Dominion through terror eternal. The survivors' records became scripture. Every word of the fortress's transmissions was preserved, analyzed, and memorized. We endure. The phrase haunted every council chamber, every academy, every barracks. It was not simply a declaration of the past. It was a warning of the future.